Hey class, and welcome to BS 200. We are in Gordon Stewart one more time, and we're going to be in chapter 11, the Psalms, Israel's prayers and ours. I love that. Many of you know the Psalms. There's 150 Psalms, and this chapter titles a great description because it talks about the Psalms as the prayers of Israel. But thousands of years later, they also become our prayers as well. And so let me just talk about a few items that are important to understand when reading the Psalms. The book of Psalms on page 212 are a collection of inspired Hebrew prayers and hymns. It's probably for most Christians the best known and most loved portion of the Old Testament. Okay. Um, and so one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is how do these words spoken to God function as a word from God to us? Okay. The Psalms, therefore, are a great benefit to the believer. So here's what you need to know. They're a great benefit to us because we look at the Bible for help in expressing joy, sorrows, successes, and failures, hopes, and regrets, or simply to worship. Okay. And so the Psalms are a great benefit because we are expressing all of these emotions as well as the psalmist when we are reading the Psalms. Okay. On page 214, the most important item to remember in reading and interpreting Psalms is that they are poems, right? They are poems. They're musical poems. And so here's a few things that you need to understand about poetry when reading the Psalms. Number one, Hebrew poetry, by its very nature, was addressed to the mind through the heart. Okay, it's addressed to the mind through the heart. Okay, so what does that mean? That the language is intentionally emotional, it's emotive, okay? And so it's full of emotions and that will trigger feelings within us, okay? And so that's what music does as well because it's musical poems, okay? The Psalms themselves are musical poems. And so here's to continue that thought. It is intended to appeal to the emotions, to evoke feelings. That straight propositional expression seldom does. That straight propositional expression seldom does, and thus to stimulate a response on the part of the individual that goes beyond a mere cognitive understanding of certain facts. This, after all, is the very reason musical poems are so well loved and so easily remembered. Okay, none of us would ever say in normal conversation, "Glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion, city of our God." But for those of us who are known John Newton's hymn well, we can both immediately pick up the next line. He whose words cannot be broken formed thee for this own abode. Okay, so there's something powerful about musical expression. Okay, and so this, because it's musical and they're poems, they not only hit the intellect and our cognitive, but they hit our hearts and our emotions as well. Okay, so that's what happens when we read these Psalms, right? We're moved as we read them. Okay, number three, the vocabulary of poetry is purposefully metaphorical. Thus, one must take care to look for the intent of the metaphor. There's a lot of metaphors in Hebrew poetry. Okay, in the book of Psalms, an example, mountains leap like rams. Okay, and so obviously the mountains are not leaping like rams, okay? But it's describing what the author is seeing and he's viewing. And as he looks at the mountains, it seems like they're leaping off of his eyes, okay? And so, and God in different contexts is variously seen as, God is seen as a shepherd. He's seen as a fortress, as a shield, as a rock. Okay. So God is not literally these things, but he's seen this way. God is seen as my shepherd. He leads me and guides me. Okay. So there's metaphors. Okay. The Psalms is literature. Okay. The Psalms are several different types. Okay. This is so important to your understanding that we will elaborate on these basic types in the book. You'll see them elaborate later, okay? But there's Psalms of lament, there's Psalms of thanksgiving, there's different types of Psalms that we see. These are the different types, okay? Each psalm is also characterized by its formal structure. Okay. One item that distinguishes the various types of psalms from each other is that each type has its own structural characteristics. With some understanding of the formal structure of the psalms, you'll be able to recognize such features as transitions from topic to topic, or the way the psalmist apportions the attentions paid to given issues, and thus give an appreciation for the message. Okay, so these different types have different formal structure, and as you know the type and as you able to recognize the structure, you're able to connect the two. Each type of psalm was intended to have a given function in the life of Israel. Okay, for example, there is the royal psalm. They were composed to be sung at the celebration of Israel's kingship. Okay, and so just one example of different functions of these psalms. They were to be sung at different occasions, okay, during the life of Israel. There are also various patterns within the psalms. The psalmist frequently took delight in certain arrangements of repetitions of words and sound, as well as stylistic play on words. Okay, so there's different patterns that you can be able to recognize. One is the repetitions, right? You'll see that the psalmist will continually repeat a phrase or a word over and over again. And lastly, each psalm has its own integrity and as a literary unit. Psalms are to be treated as wholes, not atomized into single verses, as often the case with Proverbs. As you read a given psalm, learn to follow its flow and balance. Each psalm has a pattern of development by which its ideas are presented, developed, and brought to some kind of conclusion. So, again, Fee and Stewart are telling you to read the psalm as a whole, right? Not to just take a few verses or a few words from a verse and just land on there and focus on there, but see it as a whole, because that is the way the author was presenting it to his audience. Okay, so I hope this taught you a little bit about the Psalms, and thanks so much. See you next time.